Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21 and Enfield Climate Action Forum, and this is one of the many webinars today. And today we're going to be talking to Greener and Cleaner, which is an organization in Bromley that does a tremendous number of things. I spoke to them earlier, and I can see that they do a number of things that are really interesting. And on the website, they encourage positive actions and solutions for everyday life to make green living and working the norm. So they try to create alternatives, if you like, to create a much more sustainable society. And we're lucky today because we've had Parisa Wright with us, and Parisa is a founding member of that. And she is, if she forgives me for saying it, quite a force of nature, though she's not feeling very well today, but that I know will not deter her. So let's start, Parisa, by getting you into the swing of things, by asking you a little bit about your background. I mean, what is your background? Where do you come from?
So I guess my background is lots of things, but culturally, I'm half Iranian, but I grew up very much with my Iranian side of the family in Bellingham in Lewisham Borough. Work-wise, that inspired me to go into human rights law. So I did a master's. I lived and studied in Utrecht in Holland and University of Wales Aberystwyth. So that was an interesting combo of cultures as well. And then I went into the law and started off with some human rights cases and eventually ended up in freedom of speech and then into media entertainment. So I was a media entertainment lawyer and business affairs lawyer for 20 years. And I basically gave that up last year in May. To focus full-time on this because, you know, I'm a parent of two, I have a logical brain and I have a compassionate heart, I hope. And I know that, you know, the more people actually dedicating themselves to this problem and at least doing what they can, because there's lots of ways you can do it apart from giving up your career, you know, the better. And I did that because what we have created, so going back, my other background is that, well, I can tell you how I set up the charity if that's of interest.
Well, I'll tell you that. I'll ask you that in a minute. But what's interesting in what you've just said is you've given up a career that could have been quite high paid to something that probably isn't. I mean, that takes a lot of motivation, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes. I mean, for those of us who work in this area and who get it, sometimes you feel like you're in some sort of 1990s kind of utopian movie where you kind of see lemmings jumping off a building and yet they're human beings and they're just sort of merrily going along to this sort of like weird end. And you just think, why is no one else seeing the logic of, even if you are not a compassionate person, even if you don't believe in taking care of vulnerable people, even if you don't care about your kids, you know? I mean, climate change is pretty urgently, you know, needing to be addressed for all our sakes, for every reason you can imagine. And so, you know, for me, obviously my children and, you know, vulnerable people who've always been part of what I've aimed my career to deal with are really important to me. And I knew I'd done 11 years at ITV at the end of my career and I loved being part of the arts, but I knew that if I wanted to do something that was more impactful at this stage, though I wanted to continue to help the arts, the climate change was the biggest thing possible. And I could use my contacts in the arts, in business, at local community level. So that's why I thought I could do more.
I mean, it's quite clear at the moment with the heat excess that's going on, the floods and the wildfires, that people are becoming really concerned about climate change. And you worked with Imperial College, didn't you, where you found that 75% of adults and 90% of children are worried about climate change. I mean, do you want to tell us why you did that, and did the results surprise you?
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, just to clarify, those stats didn't come from our work with Imperial. So there's loads of stats that say, and in fact, I went to a Nesta event last week where they said that the latest research shows that 80% of the British population is concerned about climate change. And it was Save the Children who did a piece of research and they found 90%, I think maybe it was 70%, but anyway, the vast majority of the children that they interviewed were raising concerns about climate as something that was giving them anxiety. So this is a major issue for adults and for children in the UK. And the work that we were doing with Imperial was looking at what research there has been done to date around inclusivity on climate change and sustainability, because for me as an outsider, and I only came to philanthropy and the environment like 5 years ago, 2018. I mean, I'd done my bit, but in a very individualistic kind of family level, but I only came to this sort of 5 years ago. And really, to me, it seemed strange that when you looked at major environmental charities, I'm not going to name any names, but a lot of them have been there for 50, 70 years, right? They're the big brands in environment that, you know, the majority of their members, their visitors, their volunteers, I mean, the vast majority, I'm talking like 80% plus, are white, often middle class people. And it's the same when you look in government as to who has those jobs. And, you know, you look at we started to look at and talk to more and more sort of climate hubs and transition towns and environmental projects on a local basis. And they were suffering the same problem, except at least a government and a massive charity, you maybe have some resources to do what a corporate would do, and maybe look at how you reach different people. And actually, so what we were doing with Imperial was doing a literature review of academic research and government research on how to reach different groups and where the gaps on that were and what the issues were. But actually what we have then started to do as well, and what we want to build on now actually, is look at the plethora of third sector research in this area, whether that's Global Action Plan, whether that's Britain Talks Climate. You know, there's some amazing research on segmenting the British public and looking at what motivates different people around different areas of sustainability and different co-benefits. And so that's what we want to, that's the next stage for us. We've also done some recent work with UCL as well around helping councils and community groups consult with the local population on what kind of options and solutions they're interested in.
Okay, I mean, the idea of reaching out to those groups that very often the charities don't represent is really important. And you started Greener and Cleaner. Now, can you tell us in a nutshell, because we'll go through it in a bit more detail, but very briefly, what Greener and Cleaner is? So
Greener and Cleaner, as it is now, and it evolved from a community group to a not-for-profit CIC to a charity. But essentially, it's a sustainable living charity. And it's, for me, the basis of it is that if we want change at a government and business and infrastructure and legal and tax level, then the British public needs to be aware of A, how climate change and sustainable living can impact and benefit their lives, and is already doing so, and B, how they can use their voices and their choices and their spheres of influence in an impactful way. And that is what the charity is about. And one of the vehicles of making that happen is our project around community sustainability support hubs run by local people to support local people. And the pilot is in South East London, supporting Lewisham, Bromley, Croydon, Greenwich and South East London people. Okay, well, tell us what a hub is, because it is a physical building, isn't it? But it's not static. You have sort of pop-up sessions all around the place. So you have this centre, but it is a network in a way, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. It's two things. First of all, it's a hub and spokes model, which means that you have the base, which is the hub. So you have that reliability, that quality of service, that quantity of offerings 5 days a week, every week since March 2022. It's been going in the Glades in Bromley and South East London. And we have majority of our attendees are from Lewisham Borough and Bromley Borough, but we have other South East London people. But essentially that is providing advice. So you can hear from other people from South East London who have been trained in carbon literacy and have their own stories to tell. So you can get advice on any areas of sustainability, home, school, potentially even work. And then it's about workshops. What are the actual skills you need to do the things that we're advising you to do or we're supporting you around? And so people sharing how to sow, how to compost, how to insulate their homes. And then secondly, the other way, and then the pop-up events are out in the community. They can be in schools, they can be in food banks, they can be in, local markets, they can all sorts of things. And those are kind of led by those communities saying what they want, but also we collaborate with local charities, local community groups, individuals raising issues that they want support with or questions they want addressed in their community. And we'll try and then either stretch our resource to do those pop-up events or apply for funding so we can do more of them. And there are
So,
some big things that cross over, like employability between the hub and those pop-ups.
so it's not just about awareness, is it? It's about developing skills, and it's about action as well, isn't it?
It's very proactive. It's very about, it's not about words, it's about actions. If you do nothing else, do X.
Okay, so you've got it going and you must have funded it in some way. Now, how do you fund yourself, and how would you recommend organizations wanting to do a similar thing to get that sort of funding?
Okay, well, I mean, to be fair, because this is a pilot for the UK, rather than, obviously it's set up in Bromley and it is giving a resource to Southeast London. But the way it's working is that it is designed to test different things. So there are common blockers that are happening across climate hubs and transition towns across the country, like the balance between volunteers and staffing, issues around inclusivity and accessibility, major issues, and also issues on diversification of funding streams. So for example, those things and more, we're testing different approaches to, and we're creating a blueprint. And as a result of it being more than simply a Bromley branch, and being a pilot and creating a blueprint, we were able to get some funding after we spoke at the Urban Design Summit at COP26. We led a panel about this project, had other experts come in, the urban design movement hosted us, and we ended up speaking to some people at what was BAYS, and they funded the stage one of that, which was some of Imperial's time and a lot of our setup costs. We also coincided with pandemic, which meant that there were some costs available, funding available for opening up vacant units, etc. However, apart from that, we have done various other things. We have applied to the lottery for specific projects. We have collaborated with other charities to bid for funding. We've done things like match funding and local crowdfunding. We've gone to local businesses and asked them to fund roles and projects. We have offered volunteering in our hub and asked for donations from businesses who are doing that with us. We are now testing different kinds of premium offerings on the 2 days a week that we're closed to the public, both for the public and also for corporates. So we're doing different things to try and bring money in and to fund the staff, because we do have part-time staff as well as the resources we need for the events.
I mean, that is a good menu to follow if people wanted to find out how they could get funding. But it's interesting, you went to COP26. How did you get an invite to that?
So basically, I love talking to people about this, like many of us do. And so, I mean, I suppose it's the same way I developed my legal career, really. It was basically, I just went to lots of events and talked to lots of people. When I met people who were like-minded to me, I went to more events with those people. And that's how I ended up meeting Chris Martin, who is one of the founders of the urban design movement, and a trustee of Living Streets, and a few other people from that urban design movement. I basically went to an event and told them I wanted to speak to more people and spread the word about what we were trying to do. And they were doing this urban design summit at COP and invited us to actually have a panel around our project specifically, which was amazing.
Okay, so that's a big picture, but going back to ground level again, I mean, you obviously develop and encourage people to develop skills. What sort of skills do you develop through your hub? I mean, you mentioned mending and repairing, but you must have a plethora of skills that you offer.
So one of the things that when I set up the group, I wanted it to be welcoming for anyone on their sustainability journey, whether literally their idea of sustainability was a reusable straw or recycling, or whether they had been, in the environmental movement for 30 years and they were looking for the next step, but they just weren't aware perhaps, I don't know, how impactful their pension was or whatever. And the other thing I wanted was for it to be 360 sustainability. So there was a lot of siloing going on, and there still is. And sometimes that's because we just don't have enough money to cover everything, but sometimes also, there's lots of reasons for that. But I just wanted there to be a space that was welcoming, that anyone could come in and ask a question around any area of the environment they were interested in. So we cover all 8 areas, from energy to food, to transport and air quality, to biodiversity and conservation, to built environment, to finance and how green your money is, to using your voice, to reducing waste. I think energy was in there. Energy should be in there if it's not. But basically, and waste, often like if people say just talk about one thing, I'll talk about waste, because waste applies to how much meat we eat, because we eat double the recommended amount from the General Medical Council. We lose energy in our homes. We lose energy by driving when we could walk. You know, we waste by buying clothes we don't need and throwing them away. There's so many ways we waste. So we cover all of those topics. So we do everything from growing workshops to sewing workshops to insulating your home to talking about what appliances at home, to workshops around what appliances at home are using more energy, to how, you know, greener transport, to cycle repair workshops, biodiversity, pond building, everything.
And what you didn't mention is you also get involved with the Library of Things and the sharing economy as well.
Yeah, and we have a library of things, which is a really good way of also bringing that. Well, when we opened the Library of Things in our hub, we were the first mainstream shopping centre they were in. So it was good to test that model. But also it brought people to the hub who might have who might never have come in, because actually they want a drill. And actually, this is the closest place to borrow a drill. But, you know, and then they come in and they see, oh, their peers are doing X, Y, and Z, you know, with this charity kind of thing. So that, and also we have litter pickers people can borrow. We also have sewing machines, 2 sewing machines that are out every day that people just come in and use. So they don't have to wait for a workshop. If they're happy doing it. Someone came in the other day with 6 silk scarves and turned them into jackets for her and her best friend. It was amazing, like, you know, and other people come and repair things like on a daily basis. When the hub is open, someone will pop in and use them. And then also we have party packs. So across the borough, we have plastic party packs, sets of 30 hard plastic cups, plates and bowls from IKEA, the rainbow ones for kids' parties, which get loaned out. People pay maybe a £5 donation or nothing. And our members host those across the borough. But we all have a pack here as well. And we have a massive china set as well. So we have it for tea parties, so the tea china set, but we also have dinner plates and salad plates. So people can borrow those for events, I think up to 50 people. And we take a suggested donation to cover, like, you know, we have to sort of check them and store them and all that work that goes with it. But it's million times cheaper, even if people do pay the suggested donation. So the sharing economy is really important to us. And on top of that network thing that you mentioned, we were very successful online initially with our Facebook group through story sharing. And we realized a lot of people wanted to give things away, but people were giving things away and they were being collected from someone who had to drive from an hour away. So we worked with a lady called Susie Bremer in Hayes Life, which is a local community group, to sort of like establish freebie cyclers groups, Facebook pages based on postcodes, so that people could also be looking at the sharing and lending economy, but giving away stuff in their local area where people would walk to collect. So that was just another thing that someone in the community had this idea. We could use people power to expand it to lots of postcodes, and we collaborated to make that a success. And we've now got loads of those all over Bromley Borough, and we'd like to expand those as well.
I mean, that's amazing. I'd love to talk to you a bit more about that, and maybe we can sometime, because I think that's something we could replicate and lots of other people could as well. And you've developed a really good model. But the other thing you do is you have training, don't you, on carbon literacy? Because, having carbon literacy, knowing the impact that carbon emissions can make and knowing what you can do to reduce those emissions or change those emissions is pretty important, isn't it? And you've gone into that. You have a carbon literacy program, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. When we were talking to Bayes initially about funding the project, one of their suggestions was, and they put us in touch with the Carbon Literacy Trust, and they said it would be really useful when you're doing this blueprint to have as part of it carbon literacy training, which can be delivered to the volunteers and staff, so that as well as their own life experiences of knowing how to pickle or knowing how to ride a bike or whatever it is that they're going to share, they also have that basic understanding of what greenhouse gases are and what in the geographical area are the highest emissions as an individual, as a community, and what people can do about it. So we provide that training to all our volunteers and our staff. And then we also offer it to the community on odd days. And then one of the ways that we've been diversifying our funding streams has been by offering carbon literacy training to councils, to businesses, to charities, to community groups. And obviously, depending on the size and the nature of those groups, sort of like, the sort of donation we get in differs, and but it's something that once somebody has been trained, they can then come to a session that we're leading and shadow a teacher, and then they can lead a session where one of our teachers shadows them, and then they are qualified to teach that course, to the rest of their staff at their firm, or the rest of the staff at the charity, or the volunteers, etc., etc. So it's a really useful thing, and we're also now doing climate fresque as well.
Okay, well, that's another thing we could talk about, because we're just beginning, in fact, tomorrow night to start on our own carbon literacy program. And so what you're doing, I think, is, again, really, really interesting. I mean, have you ever thought that what you do is so sort of powerful, if you like, that you could franchise it out?
Yes. So what the dream is, and I think what initially when we were talking to Bays, part of their idea was that we create this blueprint and perhaps a brand Bible as well. And people can take it and franchise out, so they can open it up in their shopping centres and go, look, and we would get involved with helping them talk to the landlords, etc., perhaps on a consulting basis. And they would take it on franchise style and do their one of it, wherever, in Manchester or in, I don't know, Grimsby or whatever. So that's one way of doing it. They take the blueprint that tells them all the practical stuff, but also the behavioral science, inclusion research, and also has the branding stuff. It would have their name above it. It would be the hub from, so ours is the hub from Greener and Cleaner. Theirs might be the hub from Grimsby Climate Coalition. Though I have to say, if you want to reach as many people as possible, having the word climate or climate action can sometimes be a bit off-putting to certain people. And I'm not saying it's not necessary. I'll put my life on hold for this because this is the most important thing I could possibly do with it. But I'm also coming from a background of communication and law. And I know sometimes you need to talk to people in different ways. And sometimes having the word climate action puts people off, and often the people who most need to get engaged initially. So yeah, so people can do it like that, but also people can take the blueprint. Some people already have their climate hubs. Some people already have transition towns or other projects, but they're struggling with some of those problems we discussed, whether it's inclusivity, whether it's funding, whether it's staffing versus volunteers, whether it's some of the other issues, or they just want to widen their offering behind perhaps just a mending offering or whatever it is, or just a growing offering. And so they can take our blueprint and take the bits from it that they want, that address their problems or that grow the areas that they want. And then finally, the final version is you might be in the Shetland Islands in a town or village where actually your mainstream setting is not a shopping centre, is not even a high street, but it's actually the post office once a month, or it's the town hall once a week. And so you could take that blueprint and, ask us to consult, or just do it yourselves and create a hybrid of that, right? So a hybrid version to create a whole new thing in your area, but use the blueprint to create that hybrid.
Yeah, well, that's interesting as well. And I think people will be very interested in the franchise model. It's quite interesting. You said it's also important how you talk about climate change. And I think there's a book written called How You Talk About Climate Change, because, using language that people can relate to is important. And you're right, climate change sometimes can be a block. But in a way, you're a part of this climate emergency centre movement, aren't you? Which is quite wide.
Yeah, I don't think I would say we're part of the Climate Emergency Centre movement, because I think there's a specific network associated with that, and we're not involved in that network. But I would definitely say there's lots of transition, there's lots of community sustainability / climate action projects going on, different hubs. Like the transition town doesn't necessarily have a physical space. Climate hubs have a physical space. Repair cafes sometimes have a physical space. Ours is another model basically, and it's part of a movement of communities trying to organize and do something really impactful by using people power and trusted messengers, who is our, it's our peers, right? We don't trust politicians, we don't trust corporates, but we trust somebody 2 roads down who's actually I don't know, started cycling to work, or has put solar panels on, or is eating less meat. That's what we want to hear from people like us. And actually it's the same when we do work with schools. We bring schools together to share what their experiences are, because they don't want to hear from an expert or even from a parent. They want to hear from another school that's managed to save money and also reduce their carbon emissions. And it's the same with businesses. People want to hear from their peers.
Yeah, I mean, we have a meeting tomorrow with Enterprise Enfield where we have someone coming from another business, a peer, to talk about how they save money by going green. So, that really, really is important. So, what you're doing, I think, is absolutely, dead on. Okay, so you've done so much, and you've done it probably in a short period of time, and you've given up a lucrative career in order to do it. So what are your plans for the future? How do you want to develop, and how do you want to involve the wider community?
So at the moment, what we're doing is we've just been funded. We're seeking to finalise the funding for our community outreach lead, which is really exciting. We got some funding from the funding network, and we're applying for some more funding. But essentially, that will see us working with, depending on how much funding we get, between 20 to 50 different local charities and community groups across Southeast London, giving them training, empowering them so that they can be a little bit, they can be independent in what they're doing and how they're changing or looking at their processes and infrastructure, how they're supporting their beneficiaries, and how their beneficiaries get access to what we're doing in the hub and out in the community, because we can always become more inclusive, we can always become more accessible, and from learning from those partners and sharing our knowledge with those partners, we can bring more beneficiaries in from diverse backgrounds. So that's one of the things that we're doing. But ultimately, the dream is that this pilot gets its full funding, including some research work with, Imperial and UCL, just to give that sort of academic rigor to the testing that we're doing on different approaches. And that I can then focus on, once that funding is in, I can really focus on both the partnerships work, which I'm already doing, and we already have counsellors from other places coming and looking at the hub and talking to us. We already have other community groups in transition towns coming and talking to us, and we're sharing experiences. We were interviewed for a panel for Ashton last week, I think it was. The recording will be shared. I'm doing podcasts and talks whenever I can to get as much information as possible, and like this one, getting as much information out to our peers as possible, while also saying, when people say to me, oh, can you come and do one in, I don't know, wherever, Southend-on-Sea, I say to them, we need to do this testing and research. We need to evolve to the best version to create this blueprint. Otherwise, we can't, the community has to set it up, and to support them to do it, we need to help them do it right. So they're not throwing away money, so they're not burning out people, so they're not losing goodwill in the community. And that's what we're trying to do. That testing is so important. And people don't have the time and energy to do it. They don't have the money to do it. So let us do it, and let us share that learning with everybody. So once we've done that, I want to go out to the communities who want to set up these hubs, help put them in touch with the landlords, help explain to the landlords the benefits that our landlords here have experienced: higher footfall, good for their ESG, good for the community loyalty, good for, the other units that are occupied, seeing people coming in for this experiential offering. And put them together, get their council involved in terms of sort of how they sort the rates, get their council involved in terms of carbon funds, etc., which could potentially be used, and help set up, prepare the next set of groups for the next hubs, so that when the blueprint is ready, they're ready to roll. And then basically help them by consulting and continuing to run our resource, but supporting those sort of franchises or other versions or other groups who want to do their own thing. Basically, making sure this rolls out across the UK in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I mean, what you're doing is really amazing, and you're doing so much. And I do like your links with universities, because I think that gives you a lot of kudos to have that, as well as the research. I think it's important because, people listen to you more when you do that. So, thank you for doing it. I mean, it's been great. So, I mean, if people wanted to get in touch with you, to get help, to work with you, to learn from you, to find out what you're doing, where would they go? How would they make contact?
So, there's two ways. So first of all, my name is Parisa. I think it's on there. Parisa, like Paris with an A at the end. Parisa Wright. So you can find me on LinkedIn and talk to me there. You can also drop me an email at parisa@greenerandcleaner.co.uk, all lowercase, all joined together, all full words. Parisa@greenerandcleaner.co.uk. And then we've got our website, which is www.greenerandcleaner.co.uk. And we also have a Facebook group, which is Greener and Cleaner, Bromley and Beyond, and the hub from Greener and Cleaner. So there's one specifically for the hub where we put on the events, and then we share that into the sort of interactive group. And the interactive group is really how we grew that community back in beginning of 2019. There's people wanting to share their concerns, people wanting to share their tips, people love being able to share their tips. People love being able to hear other people's stories. And it's a great way to grow a movement in your local area and to find co-conspirators and collaborators on a hub or on any kind of environmental project locally. And not just Facebook, obviously, social media, all your networks.
Yeah, all the networks, I know. And I mean, there's so many of them, keeping up with them is always a real problem. But, I mean, thank you. I mean, I think you've given us food for thought to develop our own, what we're doing in our own areas, to develop new activities, to find out how we could get funding, to see how we could create partnerships and new collaborative networks, and all that, I think, is very important. So we'll disseminate this webinar a great deal, and even little snippets from it, because, there's so many little snippets we could take, which will help people develop a single idea, which may then grow into many ideas. So thank you. I think it's been a really useful and important webinar to do, and you really do a great deal of work. And I was thinking, God help me, if you were not feeling ill, you would have said so much more,
Well,
but
Francis, there's one last thing I should say, is one piece of learning that I think is really useful is, and we've touched on this, meeting people where they are. For some people, that's a Christmas fair that's going to bring them in for the first time, because they know what a lucky dip and face painting and homemade jam is. That's what's going to bring them in. For some people, it's activities around Halloween costumes or Easter egg crafting. Even though people are like, oh, what's all this eco crafting? It brings people in, and then they find the place, and then they learn about everything else, because it's a 360 place. So really meeting people where they are. And that's the thing. If you're collaborating with local charities around autistic families or deaf plus groups or food banks, again, you can see where are they and how can I support them where they are. I think it's a really powerful thing to do, and it's really effective. So if you've got limited time and resource, think about it in that way, I think.
Okay, well, we'll end this webinar then with that message, which I think is really important. Meet people where they are. Okay, so thank you, Parisa, Paris with an A. Thank you for joining us, and it's been a great webinar. So we'll end this webinar now.